Hello, dear friends and adventurers. It's Rob, the D&D wannabe, here with some exciting news. This podcast is now made possible in partnership with our good friends at Misty Mountain Gaming. Veteran-owned and operated, Misty Mountain is one of the largest dice companies in the world. They offer the widest selection of metal, gemstone, and glass dice combined. For yourself, that special role player in your life, or your favorite podcast hosts. Just saying. Look for their booth at your next local comic, anime, or gaming convention, or find their products at mistymountaingaming.com. Okay, on with the show. Last time on Bardic Twinspiration. There are a lot of feats in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and we wanted to discuss and compare some of our favorites and least favorites. We have not discussed this going in. I don't know what all of Steve's favorites are or his least favorites are, and I expect that I'm going to get angry about some of them.
We got together to say, hey, did you get your list together? Yes. Did you get your list together? Oh, and you had this one on it, right? What? No. Are you kidding me? Really? You put that one in your good list? And then we immediately stopped because we realized that this was going to be a contentious episode.
And we want you to enjoy every contentious second.
We should probably go ahead and lay out our qualifications. How did you evaluate your top 5 and your bottom 5?
My rule of thumb is kind of what we were discussing a moment ago. I want a feat that gives me a superpower, that makes me that guy. Also, ones that are practically required to play a certain character type.
And how about your bottom 5? What really made something just sink to the dregs of the published content for you?
I'm actually looking at it from a little bit more of a mechanical perspective. There are certain feats that just seem mechanically redundant, or ineffective, or worse than an ability score improvement. Also, if a feat is just giving me abilities that I could otherwise get by multi-classing, I'm probably going to chuck it down there too.
And I like breaking the game. For me, my qualifications were, I think that ASIs are good. They are mechanically beneficial, and you can make your character even better at the stuff that they are already good at. So, generally speaking, I like my characters to be better at more things, and that's why feats are more attractive to me. So when I was evaluating my bottom 5, I made sure that there were no half feats represented there. I'm mostly viewing this from the perspective that I normally have, which is I am playing in an ongoing campaign, and now I am presented with the option of, do I take an ASI or do I take a feat? And a feat has to win out over that ASI for me to consider taking it, and also has to beat out that multi-class. All right, so the way that we're going to do this is we're going to go back and forth talking about the feats that we like and the feats that we don't.
And now, the thrilling conclusion.
Oh, whose turn was it now?
That was me hating on Adept feats, so I think it's your turn to hate on something.
Okay, my turn to hate on something.
And if I'm wrong about that, forgive me.
Well, I'll just ignore the other Adept feats. I feel like we may have beleaguered that point enough. And let me move on to Fighting Initiate.
It's come to those initiates again.
Mm-hmm. Did this one somehow survive not being on your list? Because I think this one is just one of the worst.
It's bad, but it didn't make my list of the worst.
So, Fighting Initiate, for the uninformed, is a feat that you must have proficiency with a martial weapon in order to take. Your character's martial training has helped them develop a particular style of fighting, and as a result, they learn a fighting style. See how that works? Isn't that great? You can pick one of your choice from the fighter class. And whenever you reach a level that would grant you an ability score increase, you can swap out this fighting style for one that you would prefer. Here's the thing about the fighting styles. You could just multi-class into fighter and get one anyway. The only reason that you would even consider this feat is to stay on your path for that level 20 capstone. Being a level 1 fighter gets you tons of other benefits, especially if you're considering this when you're making the character. If you're designing a multi-class character who is starting at any level higher than 1, you can take your first level in fighter in order to gain heavy armor proficiency and proficiency in all martial weapons, proficiency in shields, and you get the fighting style. Plus, you also get Second Wind. And Second Wind is a fantastic class ability. So you're basically getting a worse version of being a level 1 fighter with this. And even if you didn't take it as your first level and get all those extra proficiencies, you still get Second Wind on top of the fighting style. There's just, in my opinion, no reason to take this except for that level 20 thing, and that just doesn't come up in almost anyone's games, statistically speaking.
First of all, generally speaking, I agree with you. I think multi-classing in a fighter is a great call. Most classes have a lower hit die than a fighter, so you're getting a few more hit points for making the shift. You're getting proficiency with extra weapons, although I kind of think that the proficiency with a single martial weapon is a very peculiar caveat to have. Since we didn't compare lists beforehand, if it had been on my list, I would have done some research to find out who's got proficiency with a single martial weapon and who has none and who's missing out on this.
Yeah. Elves, notably, are proficient exclusively with, I want to say, rapiers.
They're proficient with longbows as a racial trait, and that's a martial weapon.
Yeah, the Elven's weapons training also includes rapiers.
Does it? Okay.
Mm-hmm. So that's the only one that I can think of just off the top of my head. I'm sure you could think really hard and engineer a scenario where you're proficient with some martial weapons, but not all of them, but it's probably a moot point.
This is kind of niche, and maybe not too niche, but the reason that it didn't make my list was because of bards and bladesinger wizards. Because those guys don't have access to fighting styles, and especially the dueling fighting style would go a pretty long way for those guys. Guys who are proficient with maybe only one melee weapon or a few, who don't mind getting in there and mixing it up, but who are also getting spells and class features that are pretty unique and that you might be in a hurry to get to. So at level 4, I'm still in a hurry to get to level 5 and be able to cast Fireball with my Bladesinger as soon as possible. And I don't want to slow that down to get a Second Wind, but I may want to deal 2 extra damage every time I hit someone with my rapier.
I just can't see a situation, even with that example, I would still never consider this. Because let's take a look at a couple of things. For one, you get the fighter's hit die, which is better than the bard hit die. For 2, you get the Second Wind, which cannot hurt you. It is only good. Third, you get this fighting style that you're going for, and you can do this at any level. You do not have to wait for the ASI in order to achieve this. You could take this at level 3 if you wanted to. That way, this playstyle that you're going for will come online when you're ready. And then I feel like if I did take Fighting Initiate at level 4 so that I could use the dueling fighting style and cast Fireball at level 5, by the time I got to level 6, I think I would regret it. By the time I got to level 6, I would wish that I was Bard 5 Fighter 1.
Maybe you're right.
I put this on here because you can get everything that this offers you and more with a 1-level multi-class dip. That is the only reason, but I did not see this so plainly and boldly evident on any of the other feats. So, Fighting Initiate, Steve's bottom 5.
So, back to the good ones. I was about to start, but with your snake method, I guess you're up, huh?
Okay, guess I'm up. We were talking about some initiate feats. In fact, I believe that you mentioned the magic initiate feat. You know, that was on my list for a while, because the ability to cast cantrips is fantastic. And being able to get a couple of cantrips from another class as any class, I don't think we can really minimize that. Plus, it gives you access to a level 1 spell from a class of your choice, and there are some great level 1 spells out there, like Protection from Good and Evil, Shield of Faith, Mage Armor, Bless, Charm Person if you're into that sort of thing. There's a lot of good level 1 spells, especially Find Familiar, which we could probably do a whole episode on why Find Familiar is so good. And notably, you could take Magic Initiate for a separate spellcasting class while you are already a spellcasting class, giving you the ability to add the spells to your spells known and cast them more using your other spell slots. You're not just limited to the one free use that you would otherwise get per day. But I replaced Magic Initiate on my list in the 9th hour, and I replaced it with the Aberrant Dragon Mark from Wayfarer's Guide to Eberron, which is just a strictly better version of Magic Initiate. Are you familiar with that one?
I'll be honest, I didn't pay much attention to Eberron. It doesn't tickle my fancy very much. I played briefly in a setting that used some dragon marks and whatnot, but while I read through every feat that was out when we were making this list, I read some more closely than others.
Well, I had never really heard of this one either. That's why it wasn't on my list originally, until I just happened to go through it again before this episode and really kind of dig into what exactly it entails and where it diverges from Magic Initiate. Which, again, Magic Initiate prior to this was probably good enough to be on this list on its own. The Aberrant Dragon Mark does shoehorn you into the Sorcerer spell list. You learn one Sorcerer cantrip and you learn one Sorcerer first level spell. But in addition to that, you also increase your Constitution score by 1, which is very often one that people leave an extra point in, so this would round that up and get you some extra hit points more than likely. Now, your Constitution is your spellcasting ability for these spells. That part is a little bit weird to me.
That's weird.
For certain character builds, maybe you would prefer Magic Initiate based on that part alone. But for me, it wasn't a deal breaker because you also get this weird third ability, which is that when you cast the first level spell that you chose from your Dragon Mark, you can opt to expend one of your hit dice, and you get an additional benefit depending on what that hit die result is. If you roll an odd number, then a creature within 30 feet of you takes force damage equal to that number, and if you roll an even number, you gain that many temporary hit points instead.
That's weird.
Yeah.
So the difference between this and the Initiate is you're missing out on a bonus cantrip, and it's shoehorning you into the Sorcerer spell list, and it's making you use a non-standard ability score as your spellcasting modifier. All of which is just weird. Like, I don't see this stacking with somebody's existing build very well. Like, this is going to be something that they take just to be different.
Yeah. You know, as I read over this, and I'm really objectively looking at all the different builds that a person could make with Magic Initiate versus the number that they could make with Aberrant Dragon Mark, I am realizing that Magic Initiate is significantly more versatile. But if you were going to choose spells from the Sorcerer spell list, I would strongly consider Aberrant Dragon Mark as a strict improvement. Sorcerers dig Constitution. They already have proficiency in those saving throws, and a lot of their spells are concentration, so I think that this really leans into that sort of build and gives you this neat little add-on ability that isn't like anything that I can find from any other class or trait.
And I do like the Sorcerer spell list. Even just having access to their first level spells, Sorcerers have some unique first level spells that only Sorcerers get access to.
Things like Chaos Bolt, yeah, they can be pretty fun.
But to me, and that little extra ability tacked on at the end is pretty cool. I like things that are unique in the game, and there's nothing like the Aberrant Dragon Mark out there in the wider D&D world. However, I will say that Magic Initiate, for the same reasons that Fighter Initiate made your bottom tier, Magic Initiate is in my bottom tier, because you're better off just taking a level in Sorcerer. If you want access to the Sorcerer spell list, extra cantrips and extra spell slots compared to what the Initiate feat or the Dragon Mark would be giving you. So Aberrant Dragon Mark, yeah, it's different and you get a cool, fun little thing. But this feels like something that I would inflict upon a player rather than something that I would take. This feels like something that comes up through the course of the story and the DM gives you this weird little bonus and then inflicts a monkey's paw on you at some point and makes some drawback, which, I mean, the feat even lists some flaws that come part and parcel with the feat.
Yeah, when you put it that way and you kind of use my own rules against me, then it does kind of put a damper on Magic Initiate and Aberrant Dragonmark. I will say only one thing in defense of Aberrant Dragonmark, which I forgot to mention earlier. The first level spell that you get through this feat, you can cast every short rest.
Okay.
Not every long rest. So it's a little bit neater if you really have something that you want to do with that first level spell. Although, I do now realize that Find Familiar is not a sorcerer spell. So that does kind of, for a second there, I was thought, oh yeah, but there's also this cool thing. And I thought, oh yeah, but you can't take the obvious best spell. So maybe I should have reconsidered that. I will admit that I was heavily influenced by people who were telling me how great Magic Initiate was, that I thought, well, maybe I'm just missing something here. But you're right, by virtue of the reasons that I don't like Fighting Initiate, a multi-class dip in a lot of ways might serve you better.
Now that said, I'm not saying that Magic Initiate is in my bottom 5, and neither is Aberrant Dragonmark. And if you think that this is a fun thing to take, or something that your character would be interested in, I'm not going to beat on you like I will about my actual bottom 5.
All right, so let's talk about one that you do like. Where are we at on Rob's list?
So this one, I don't know, something about, like, clearly with the actor and with the sharpshooter, you're that guy, right? You clearly have a vision as soon as you say the feat of what sort of person this character is going to be. My next one, frankly, I took for kind of more mechanical reasons.
Rob, how could you?
Yeah, I know. There's still a lot of roleplay potential in it. In fact, the first phrase in my notes for this point is, base a character on this. But it's not as easily and quickly identifiable as the others. I really like the Dual Wielder feat.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a solid feat. We'll just lay it out there. It's a very punchy little feat, so I'm just going to read it as written. You master fighting with 2 weapons, gaining the following benefits. You gain a +1 to AC while you're wielding a separate melee weapon in each hand. You can use 2-weapon fighting, something that every class and every character has access to, even when one-handed melee weapons that you are wielding aren't light. And you can draw or stow 2 one-handed weapons when you would normally be able to draw or stow only 1. First thoughts, what you got? I feel like you're about to either rip me a new one or agree.
All right, so the Dual Wielder feat started out on my list by default. And then I did some research. And honestly, it's been so long since we planned to do this episode that I don't remember exactly what was said. But I have seen some people do some math to try to break down like the damage mechanical benefits of taking this feat, and it just wasn't as impressive as I thought it was going to be. Now, the Dual Wielder archetype that you're trying to portray, I get the feeling that what you want to do is you want to have a weapon in both hands. The larger and more powerful the weapon that you have in both hands, the better, and you want to use them equally as well as the other. That takes some doing to kind of bring that online. You need a fighting style, you need this feat in order to even really consider meeting those criteria. But then when you achieve it, the damage just isn't that significant. Like the bonus to hit that you're getting just wasn't as big as I just naturally assumed it was going to be. And so I saw them do the math on this is how much you get by taking the Dual Wielder feat in terms of average damage per round, and this is how much you would get from an ASI, and it just wasn't there. Now granted, the Dual Wielder feat does give you that +1 bonus to AC whenever you have them in 2 hands, and then it kind of removes the penalty of only being able to draw or stow 1 weapon as you normally would. But the reason that I took Dual Wielder as my very first character was because I thought it was going to get me more damage. And this month, I look up the math on it, and it really wasn't more damage.
So, here's where I'm coming from with it. And again, I'm mostly taking this from a mechanical standpoint, but I really like the idea of just being the guy who runs into combat and becomes a whirlwind of steel.
Yeah, more Legolas, more Drizzt Do'Urden.
Yeah, or preferably with big honkin' warhammers or longswords and not little pokey knives like old Legolas has.
Right.
So the best weapons that you can dual wield without taking these feats are short swords.
Mm-hmm.
Use them with your strength, use them with your dexterity. It's 2d6 light weapons. Or you can pick weapons with the thrown property, like hand axes or daggers.
Dagger. Right.
Yeah, pretty much. This is very much a martial feat. And when I think martial, I think fighters. Although paladins and barbarians can make good use of this too. The paladin that I played took this feat to be able to wield 2 longswords in a fight. The choice you're usually making as a martial class is, do I use my offhand for a shield, or do I use it for a weapon? And this takes those 2 choices and kind of gives you the better part of both. Rather than getting a shield and having a +2 to your armor class, you get a +1. You're halfway there. And for losing that 1 point of AC, you're able to snag up to an extra D8 plus your ability score modifier of damage to your opponent. That's pretty great. Even if it's just your offhand, that's something. And that may be a magical weapon that you're holding in that hand that does something else that's cool. And besides that, drawing and stowing multiple weapons, if you're a guy who is able to fight with a weapon in each hand, but you get surprised in your boudoir by an assassin, it's going to take you 2 turns or your action on your first turn to be able to get a weapon in both your hands. That's too long. That's how you fight. You want to be able to come online immediately. And being able to fish both your weapons out and take the turn as you normally would is great. And I know I've been talking for a second, but you mentioned coming online as a 2-weapon fighter. The way that you do that is by snagging that 2-weapon fighting style that the fighters get and some other classes get.
Right.
And that gives you your ability score modifier to that second swing. It's part of the character dream, the vision that I have when I picture that whirlwind of steel.
Right.
A variant human who takes their first level in fighter can have this feat and the 2-weapon fighting style before session 1. And that is awesome. Just being that guy from day 1 doing stuff that no one else in the party can do, I love it. I think that's a tight character concept. I think it's mechanically significant, especially in terms of the action economy, and it lets you dip into that little bit of protection while it seems like you're going full offense.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely a good one. And like I said, it was originally on my list until I took it off. I just don't think it did everything that I hoped for, and I just thought there were some better options. So at the end of the day, it started on my list, and it was replaced by other things that I ended up liking more.
I just like the idea of wielding 2d8s instead of 2d6s.
Should Dragon Mark have made it over this one? In hindsight, maybe not, but my number 6 choice easily would have beaten Dual Wielder, and in my opinion, and still would. So it's not bad. It just wasn't my top 5 material, but I can definitely see how this would enable a particular character concept.
All right. Well, I don't have to be 100% right every time. I can be 90% right most of the time.
So let's see how you feel about another one that you dislike.
All right. So next on my list for things I dislike, and I'm trying so hard to save the best for last. We're going to go with moderately armored. This one is just so dull. It's so bad. I mentioned to you that one of my bottom 5 did have a half ASI in it.
Yep.
And this is the one.
I will say that I looked at moderately armored, and I looked at that fact that it was a half feat and that it gave you that 1 point bonus to strength or dexterity, and I said, based on my criteria, this categorically cannot be in my bottom 5 because of the base value that you get from that ability score increase. If I did not feel that way, and I had not set that criteria for myself, moderately armored probably would have made an appearance.
So, again, really punchy little player's handbook feat. I'm just going to read it as written. You've trained to master the use of medium armor and shields, gaining the following benefits. +1 to your strength or dexterity. you gain proficiency with medium armor and shields. The feat does have the prerequisite that you must already be proficient with light armor to take this feat.
Mm-hmm.
And right there starts the bulk of my problems with this.
Really?
Because
it would make sense that you kind of like step up, right? Like you need to be proficient in light armor to be medium armor to be heavy armor.
Oh no, it makes sense. Just it is so limiting by virtue of that. Because guess what? Barbarians, clerics, druids, fighters, paladins, and rangers are never going to need this feat because they're already proficient with at least medium armor and shields. Monks, sorcerers, and wizards aren't proficient with light armor. So while the bulk of the classes don't need it, 3 of the remaining classes can't take it unless they have taken another feat to become proficient in light armor or are multiclassed. So only bards, rogues, and warlocks can even consider taking this feat. And that is so limiting. And not every build for those 3 classes is going to want this. I would argue probably most don't. And even then, some subclasses of the bard class, at the very least, give you medium armor proficiency. So valor bards don't need it.
And to make all of this just so much worse, if you take just 1 level of multiclass in cleric, druid, fighter, paladin, or ranger, you will get not only this medium armor and shield proficiency, but more stuff on top of it. And better hit dice, and new class features. Like, the only reason that I could see you considering this is if you needed that medium armor proficiency for one of those 3 classes, and your DM did not allow multiclassing, which is just so few people these days, it seems like.
It's
if
bad.
Multiclassing is on the table, you could just like take a Sharpie and remove this from your book.
Man, and you know what? I'll give it this. Medium armor proficiency and shield proficiency are tied everywhere that they appear in the book. You never get one without the other. And being able to become proficient in shields by taking this feat is not bad. But again, it's only available to bards, rogues, and warlocks. And 2 of those, maybe 3, depending on your subclass, are spellcasters. And unless you take another feat, you are not going to be able to hold a weapon and a shield and use your somatic components for spells. So, even the shield proficiency is not that useful for the 3 classes that are going to be able to take this feat out the box.
You know, for those 3 classes being the only ones that can really benefit from this, I'm wondering, why did they even put the option to put that 1 ASI into strength? Because I feel like those 3 classes are always going to pick dexterity. That just seems odd to me. I mean, I'm always a fan of choice. You know, you should have more options when you're creating your characters, but that's just such an odd one.
Ooh, another one of my favorite feats is a lot of choice involved, but we'll get there.
Okay.
But that's a good point. Normally, I'm a fan, like you are, of feats that give that +1 to an ability score. Normally, that can save a bad feat for me, but I'm giving up a +2 to an ability score, or 2 +1s, and to take a feat instead of the normal ability score improvement, I'm just looking for a little more from a feat than Moderately Armored is giving me. So yeah, bottom 5.
Well, I just think that there are some that are even worse. I mean, the base value of that ASI keeps it above a couple more for me. Let's go ahead and get into one of those now. So the reason that I don't like Grappler is because the grappled condition is just terrible. The fact that there is a feat that is intended to fix this is a really good idea. And I can see this being a very particular archetype. You know, you're like the wrestler, you know, the guy who doesn't need any weapons. He's going to pin you down and just like, you know, make you tap out into submission. That sounds cool. There's a player for that. But the grappler feat doesn't make grappling good. and therefore I dislike it. Okay, the prerequisite
There is a player in the Godfather's campaign alongside me who has a character with this feat. And you know what? The most use he ever got out of it was to try and grapple my player character and shove him against my will into a bag of holding, which was an incident that almost killed the campaign. So no, I'm not a big fan of this feat either.
Well, let's talk about it. The prerequisite is that you have strength 13 or higher. It makes sense for a grappler to, need to be a strong guy, so no problems there. The type of character that is taking this probably has 13 or more strength. The prerequisite is not where this feat fails for me. This character has developed the skills necessary to hold their own in close quarters grappling. They have advantage on attack rolls against a creature that they are grappling. And they can use their action to try to pin a creature that they have grappled. To do so, they need to make another grapple check, and if they succeed, the creature is restrained until the grapple ends. No, I'm sorry. You and that creature are both restrained until that grapple ends.
The thing about restrained is
that wasn't that I didn't read it incorrectly. I was trying to
draw
out how bad that was. Yeah, okay.
I got that. Being restrained is worse than being grappled, and I would love a feat that let me restrain a creature.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds good. A feat that lets me restrain myself. Interesting.
Yeah, I get class features that are like, a little bit of give and take, like the whole reckless attack thing, where you gain advantage in exchange for other people having advantage against you, or sharpshooter, where you take a penalty in order to gain an advantage. But being restrained is just, it's pretty bad, man. It means that your speed becomes 0. It means that any attacks against you have advantage, any attacks that you make have disadvantage, and you have disadvantage on dexterity saving throws. In my head, having the grappler feat should allow you to restrain your opponent. I think that is what I imagine when I think of this archetype in my head, and I know why they put it in there. It kind of makes sense that you are using your entire body to hold down this person, and therefore you can't do anything else.
To hold down their entire body.
Yeah, exactly. But that's pretty bad. Like, this is only useful in a one-on-one sort of scenario,
Yeah.
If there's more than one enemy, this becomes a problem. Also, in order to get into this position, you have to succeed on multiple checks. Not a check. Multiple checks. And you have to use, I want to say, 2 actions.
Yep. Action to grapple and action to pin.
You have to grapple, and you have to have a successful check 2 times. That's 2 turns, and you have to win 2 times in a row. Otherwise, they escape.
And characters with multiple attacks can make multiple grapple checks in a turn. Not a big deal. But the grapple feat does not let you make one of your multiple attacks to pin. Pinning has to be your whole action. So you can have up to 4 or 5 chances as a high-level fighter to grapple somebody, but you still gotta wait till next turn to pin them, and you're kind of a sitting duck in the meantime. So like you said, it really is kind of a mano-a-mano sort of feat, which is really too bad.
Yeah, my luchador will have to be played in another system, because it just ain't happening in this one.
But you know what? That is not even the most damning part of this to me, because it doesn't give me what I'm looking for if I want to be the grappler guy. When I want to be the actor, and I take the actor feat, I get advantage on all my attempts to act. And I unlock a special ability that always works that nobody else can do. When I want to be the grappling guy, I want to be able to do it faster than anyone else. I want to be able to do it better than anyone else. And I want no one to be able to escape me once I put them there. And I want to maybe even be able to do other stuff while I have them grappled.
And you want to be able to do it reliably. Grappling is something that is available to any character in D&D 5e, but it's bad. So you take the grappler feat to try to fix that. Again, but it's
still bad.
It just doesn't. It's still bad. The grappler feat requires you to make 2 checks over 2 turns, must both succeed in a row, And then there are still disadvantages, and it offers you no bonus to be able to make it happen. You're still just relying on your raw strength score. I mean, like, you're not even... It's just bad. I don't even know if I can talk about it anymore. It's just bad.
And then, what's the thing that happens when you succeed? D&D combat isn't wrestling. You're not going for the pin. Pinning doesn't mean you win. Let's say you're in a mano-a-mano situation and you do pin the guy. Then what? You just do that? You wait for your friends to wail on him, or...
So, we just sit here? No, and I think that's really what it's designed to do. It's designed to take one member of your party out of the fight in order to take one member of their party out of the fight and make them super easy to finish off. And I get it, and that's good. It's just too hard to set up. All right, so we moving on?
Yeah, moving on. I'm depressed now.
Okay, so let's talk about a good feat, like an unequivocally good feat. Would that make you feel better?
So good. Yeah, much better.
Like a super obvious choice. Like the one that everyone talks about. Like probably the primo melee martial character feat.
Oh, no.
Any ideas?
I'm having flashbacks here.
The one that all DMs seem to like really hate, or is that just you and the Godfather?
I am... You're going to bring up Sentinel.
Yeah, Sentinel. Guys, Sentinel
it's good.
So good. You have mastered the techniques to take advantage of every drop in an enemy's guard and gain 3 awesome benefits. When a creature within 5 feet of you makes a attack against a target who is not you, then you can use your reaction to make a melee attack against the attacking creature. More attacks are great, and now you can do them with your reaction.
Yeah, reactions, they only come up so often. Most of them have a certain trigger, and if the trigger never comes up, then you don't get to use the action. Giving yourself a new way to make use of a uncommon action on a round is a good thing.
Hey, let's talk about a trigger that does normally come up and would allow you to reuse your reaction. When you would get an attack of opportunity by an enemy leaving melee with you. But there's a way that an enemy can get around that. They could take the disengage action to leave your reach unmolested and uncontested.
That's a good rhyme.
Oh, except you took the Sentinel feat, which means that creatures provoke opportunity attacks from you even if they take the disengage action before leaving your reach.
That's so cheaty. This is the frustrating part to me.
Well, it's particularly frustrating when you add in point number 3, which is when you hit a creature with an attack of opportunity, that creature's speed becomes 0 for the rest of the turn.
You made it clear that your list was comprised of mechanically sound, advantageous, combat-effective feats, and Sentinel is one of them. It belongs.
Sentinel is so good. Guys, if you play a melee character, don't leave home without it. If you haven't taken it before, it will change your life.
It will change your dungeon master's life.
Anyone that you are in melee with will not get away. If someone is standing next to you and they make an attack against anyone else, you can attack them. Or if they try to get away from you before attacking anyone, you can attack them. And anytime that you hit a creature with an attack of opportunity, their speed becomes 0. Unmodified. 0. Flat. Nothing. Nothing will leave your reach as long as you connect with that melee attack. When you take a paladin or a hexblade warlock or a fighter or a barbarian, things that leave your melee range are the bane of your existence. Take this against an enemy that has a fly speed when you finally grounded it, and just watch it sit and suffer in melee with you for the rest of the combat. Yeah, it is. I don't know how else to say it. It is just so satisfying to solve the problems of being a melee martial class in one feat.
I'm moaning and groaning because I've been in many campaigns where a cool and interesting roleplay scene or a dramatic escape or a clever trick in combat was thwarted by this single feat. And I don't suppose I mean thwarted so much as prevented. And that's me being precious with the way that I thought a fight was going. And it was something that I had more of a problem with in my younger years of being a dungeon master, but that I still have some trauma over.
It forces your dungeon master to be extremely creative because they don't want to take anything away from their players. If a player has taken the Sentinel feat, you want to have their character behave in the way that they expect, which makes it kind of difficult for some of your enemies to make an escape.
The feats that give you combat workarounds are great, and Sentinel is probably the king of them. There is no answer to it, almost, because disengaging is normally the way to prevent opportunity attacks. This doesn't work. If you don't want to engage with the heavily armored fighter with the big flaming sword, you attack his friend. Well, he gets to attack you now. Whatever it is. The only thing that prevents the egregious terribleness of Sentinel is if the creature you're fighting has also taken a feat, the mobile feat, and has made a melee attack against the character with Sentinel. Then they don't provoke the opportunity attack at all. Disengaging be damned.
Or you could have your enemy have something like teleportation, things like Misty Step or things like Blink that will allow them to not walk or fly away from the person who has the Sentinel feat. But, if every enemy that your players are faced with has the ability to Misty Step, they're going to be onto you. So,
and I should stop dogging on it. This is on Steve's top 5. This is worthy of being on Steve's top 5. It is worthy of you taking it and having it be a feat for your next character. It is a dang good feat. I am just salty.
It forces the Dungeon Master to design his combats in a way that requires a lot more creativity. Sentinel is something that you can build a character around, but it's also something that the Dungeon Master has to design an encounter around. So, it's fun for the person who takes it.
And that's what feats should be.
Anyway, I took it as my first paladin and loved it, and I'll probably take it as every paladin that I make from now till the end of time. I'm trying to be more creative with some of my other characters, but by God, an Oath of Vengeance paladin with the Sentinel feat is just a force to be reckoned with.
As if paladins needed the help.
All right, Rob, you talk to me about what you like.
You know what I like? Spellcasting. You know what I also like? Not having those spells getting beat out of me by some jerk with a club. So when I leave home, ready to cast spells on an adventure, I never leave home without the Warcaster feat.
Ah, yes. You remember how I mentioned that there was a sixth choice? Warcaster stayed on my list for so long. And honestly, as we go through these and go back and forth, if I did it again, I'd probably put it above Aberrant Dragonmark.
It's so good, Steven.
I know. All of my paladins have had Warcaster. My Hexblade had Warcaster. If a campaign continues long enough, heck, Salem might even get Warcaster. This is the... What's the word for it? The Gish? This is the Sword Mage equivalent of Sentinel. They are just on par with each other in terms of power, and Warcaster enables a playstyle in a way that Sentinel doesn't. Sentinel just makes you good at one thing, so good that it almost can't be avoided. Warcaster makes you be able to be a battle mage, and it's pretty much the only way to do that perfectly effectively.
Mages are infamously the glass cannons of Dungeons and Dragons. You take the Warcaster feat, and you basically become a ballistic glass cannon, or a tempered glass
a
cannon.
Plexiglass cannon.
Yeah, it makes you somewhat reinforced. You've practiced casting the spells in the midst of combat, learning techniques that grant you advantage on Constitution saving throws that you make to maintain your concentration. But coming back to that, that's the main reason I take it. You can perform the somatic components of spells even when you have weapons or a shield in your hands.
That is the main reason that I take it.
And when a creature provokes an attack of opportunity from you, you can cast a spell rather than making a melee attack as an opportunity attack. There are some qualifiers, but you can do it.
It's really good for tossing command on someone who's trying to run away and telling them to drop prone. But that's pretty much the only way that I've used that last ability.
Oh, no, man. Lightning Lure. Sacred Flame, Chill Touch, just being able to fire cantrips at people who are running away from you is solid.
Oh, yeah. No, those are great, especially the ones like Lightning Lure and stuff that drag them back to you. But if you've got the spell slot to use on it, telling him to drop prone means you can walk over and get some advantaged attacks for your next Divine Smite. Crit fishing, man. I'm a paladin. Crit fishing.
And allowing you to cast action spells as a reaction is great. But let's go back through those.
Let's do it.
Some of the best spells in the game, in my opinion, are concentration spells.
Pretty much all of them.
Big effects that control the battlefield, that cost some higher level spell slots, but that can really change the course of the game. And a lot of the time, you can burn that 7th level spell slot, and the fire giant comes over, kicks you once in the gut, and that spell slot is gone because you start thinking about the pain in your gut rather than how your spell works.
Right. Concentration spells really get you a lot of bang for your buck if they last a couple of turns. If they don't, then you're better served with some sort of one-off spell that'll just get in there and do some damage. But all of the big battlefield control spells, all of the big buff spells, you have to be able to maintain concentration in order to perpetuate those. And that's how you get some of the best value as a spellcaster. And your team will love you for it, unless it just happens to fall off after a round or two.
Let's take Cloud Kill, Bigby's Hand, Wall of Ice, Eye Bite, Flesh to Stone, a Globe of Invulnerability. All of these things are incredible encounter-changing spells that cost spell slots that you might not have again after you finish casting. You're not going to get a do-over next turn if that fire giant comes up and punts you into next week. So your best bet is to A, not get hit, and if you do, and you inevitably will, to be able to make that concentration check. Be able to maintain that spell. And concentration checks are somewhat forgiving in the first place, but you have to make them every time you take even a single point of damage, and it can be a war of attrition trying to keep a powerful spell up. And just making yourself twice as likely to succeed makes a huge difference. I don't care what class you are playing, from warlocks to bards to arcane tricksters trying to maintain an illusion. It's all important. I don't play spellcasters, especially full-class spellcasters, without taking Warcaster at some point.
Yeah, concentration can be hugely important, even for lower-level spells, like, say, Fly. You cast Fly, you take off into the air so that you can rain down your other attacks on the enemies from the safety of your vantage point, and then someone shoots an arrow at you, and now you're plummeting and getting ready to take some fall damage.
Featherfall, baby. But no, great example.
Let's move on to that second point, if you're all right with it.
Yeah.
Because like I said, this is the big one for me. When I play paladins and clerics and things like that, I enjoy being able to get up and mix it up in the melee with fighters, barbarians, and the enemies and kind of protect the back line. And usually, especially when I'm playing a paladin, I want to be swinging a melee weapon so that I can be landing some hits and maybe tossing in some divine smites. There's also a lot of spells that only trigger when you hit with a melee attack. And casting those spells requires a free hand, forcing me to choose between casting the spell or making these melee attacks or holding my shield, which of course I want my shield if I'm going to be any sort of frontline fighter. So the Warcaster feat allows me to essentially ignore these somatic components while I'm holding a melee weapon and a shield. This means I have to drop nothing, and I can cast my bonus action spells and still make an attack every round. The advantage on Constitution saving throws, for me, is a awesome perk, but it was a perk. The big thing for me was this feat enabled the Battle Mage playstyle that I was going for.
Yeah, I mean, you want to either have that oversized weapon that you need both hands to hold, or that shield to protect yourself. You don't want an empty hand in the thick of it, right? It would have been worth it if it had specified that you can use it while wearing a shield, or with a weapon in one hand, or whatnot. But it just opens everything up.
You know, the perfect way to do this, for my money, is to take the Warcaster feat and to get the common magic item, Ruby of the War Mage. Ruby of the War Mage allows you to turn any melee weapon into an arcane focus, or into a holy symbol for the purposes of using your cleric and paladin spells, meaning that you can now essentially ignore/perform the material and somatic components while holding a shield and a longsword, which is just the dream.
Hard to argue with. And the last point is just a cherry on top.
Right.
Gives you versatility when it comes to your spells, gives you the opportunity to cast another spell each turn, and to make your problems go away faster.
And we've already mentioned our favorite choices for when we find ourselves in that situation. So, yeah, Warcaster probably should have been on my top 5 too.
Yeah.
And I have buyer's remorse for some of the other ones that I put there instead.
If someone has made it this many episodes into Bardic Twinspiration, they've probably checked out some D&D, and you don't have to go far into D&D to recognize that Warcaster kicks ass. So we won't belabor the point. Moving on, my penultimate least favorite feat is Weapon Master. And frankly, it's there for pretty much the same reason that Moderately Armored is there. And I don't think we need to waste a lot of time on it. It would allow you to gain proficiency with some new weapons. Not even all of them, just some.
Yeah, 4 specific weapons of your choice.
Like, whoop-de-frickin'-do. Like, there's multi-class into fighter. Like you said, there's 20 levels in the game. You have 20 opportunities to get this function. And not just this function, more function than this by multi-classing.
It is crazy how many of these feats on our list are just like 1 level fighter, done.
Yeah, right? And unless you are a fighter, you only get 5 opportunities to take an ability score improvement or a feat. Just don't waste it on Weapon Master.
Yep.
Fighters would be the class that might want to get more weapon proficiency or something because that's all that they do, but fighters don't need it. They're proficient with them all. Barbarians are proficient with them all. Paladins are proficient with them all.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, most of the other classes are already proficient with the weapons that they need to be proficient with because they need them to be that class.
Yeah, this one's not good. The only reason it wasn't on my list is because in addition to those 4 weapons, you do get a point of either strength or dexterity. So categorically, as a half feat, it categorically was better than some of the ones that I was looking at, but it's bad. 1 level of fighter will do. Thank you.
Or just take that other point in strength or dexterity.
Yes.
Or in whatever the hell you want.
Yeah, just go ahead and get 2 dexterity. That will make your rapier deal 1 more damage. It'll always deal 1 more point of damage, and you don't have to worry about moving up to the other weapon.
It's just bad. It makes me angry. Let's talk about something else.
All right. We are moving on to the tail end of my list. The next one on my list is Martial Adept. We kind of already did the whole Adept thing.
Oh, yeah, oops.
I felt like out of all of these, Martial Adept was particularly disappointing. You know what I'm talking about because you already mentioned it earlier. You learn 2 of the Battle Master's maneuvers, and then you get 1 superiority die in order to use them. Now, it is per short or long rest, but once per short or long rest, you can use 1 of your 2 Battle Master maneuvers using that D6. It's just getting to do 1 thing per short rest. I felt like that was even worse than the whole Eldritch Adept thing because most invocations are just always on.
Yeah, and what's more damning to me is an invocation always succeeds. It's always on and it always works. Most maneuvers, and certainly the ones that I find interesting from that Battle Master list, require a saving throw or a check, and there's an opportunity for them to fail. So not only do you only get to try 1 time, but it might not even work.
Yeah.
And when it might not even work, if it does work, it's a D6. It upgrades as you go through being a Battle Master. And even Battle Masters who take this won't get to enjoy an extra superiority die that's as good as all their other superiority dice that they have been leveling up and improving steadily as they progress as a character. The one that they get from this feat will always be as crummy as when they got them at level 3.
Yeah, I just felt like it was the most disappointing of the Adepts. It's not good if you're not a fighter, and it's honestly not that good if you are a fighter.
This probably should have replaced Eldritch Adept in my bottom 5.
But it's still not my worst one, though. I did save the worst for last, so we'll get to that in just a minute, and I'm really curious to see if this one landed on your list, too, because I noticed it hasn't been mentioned yet.
I'm sure that we're going to agree that they're bad.
All right. Let's move on to the final good feat. So this is not the best feat that I put on my list, because I've already kind of talked about vaguely where I figured that these fell if I had to put them in a ranking. But it is the one that I am most surprised to see here. For a long time, this was going to be the Crossbow Expert feat, which I still argue is excellent. But right here at the end, I took a look at Gunner and realized it's really good. All right, let's talk about Gunner. Are you familiar with it?
Recently.
Yeah, okay.
It's a Tasha's. Tasha's been around for a while as of the time of recording here, but I'm still poring over all of the older books and some of the newer books. I'm a little slower to adapt and to welcome in new things than perhaps some other dungeon masters out there, so it's not fresh in my mind.
So I consume all of my source books digitally, but if I had a printed copy of this on my nightstand, would probably be the Bible and Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, right next to each other. So, let's talk about Gunner. You have a quick hand and keen eye when employing firearms, granting you the following benefits. First off, it gives you an ability score increase to your dexterity. This feat didn't need it, but it got it. So that's just icing on the cake. Pretty much made me throw Crossbow Expert out just by reading that. Secondly, you gain proficiency with firearms. Go check out the firearm section if you want to see what they're like, but they're good.
They are good.
They are empirically better than any of the other ranged martial weapons in the game. If your DM is allowing you to use firearms in their setting, then you should. The ammunition is expensive, but you're an adventurer. You're going to come by some money, and it's going to be worth it to spend it on that ammunition. The downside to the firearms is the loading property. And if you don't know what the loading property is, it basically means that if you get extra attacks normally, you don't with firearms or crossbows or what have you, which is one of the reasons why I had Crossbow Expert listed for so long on this list, because ignoring the loading property of crossbows is really good. And ignoring that loading property of firearms, which are better than crossbows, is just even better.
Even better.
Exactly.
Yep.
And the last ability here is being within 5 feet of a hostile creature does not impose disadvantage on your ranged attack rolls.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, if you've got a gun, you can be doing longsword damage or more to creatures, whether they are 60 feet away from you or 5 feet away from you, with no disadvantage in either situation without having to switch out your weapons, and you can make as many attacks as you would with that longsword, because we're now ignoring the loading property of your firearm. Also, you get a dexterity increase. It's really, really good.
So, I have taken the Crossbow Expert feat on many characters who have never touched a crossbow. Just for that last point, being within 5 feet of a hostile creature doesn't impose disadvantage on your ranged attack rolls. Crossbow Expert has that benefit as well. It also has the ignoring loading property and whatnot. It does give you something that Gunner does not, in the ability to make basically an offhand crossbow attack, which is really a hand crossbow attack.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a feature locked into that particular weapon. But the Crossbow Expert does give you the opportunity to make those melee ranged attack rolls without that disadvantage, regardless of the weapon that you are wielding. Gunner gives you the same thing, so they both share that very versatile option. But if you don't use crossbows, you miss out on everything else from Crossbow Expert. If you don't use firearms, you still get a +1 to your dexterity.
Right.
Which empirically makes Gunner better in my mind if you want to use any ranged weapon.
The main reasons that I like Gunner are the main reasons that I like Crossbow Expert, because they both share what I think are the two major aspects of both of these feats. Crossbow Expert gives you that ability to make the offhand attack with a hand crossbow, which basically, if you're using a heavy crossbow or a normal crossbow, then that line doesn't exist for you. It is only there for hand crossbow users because it wants you to be Vala from Diablo 3, right? Gunner, on the other hand, gives you access to a whole new list of weapons, and it gives you that dexterity increase. Also, again, this is kind of setting dependent because some DMs are just not going to make firearms available to you.
It took me a long time to let them in my world.
Right, and if you're playing with one of those DMs, it's a wasted feat. But to all of those DMs out there who don't allow firearms in your world, may I just say that in real life, the first firearms were invented before plate armor, which I know you have in every game of D&D that you run. Someone is wearing plate armor, and therefore you should consider letting someone be able to use firearms. Now, no one is coming in with a AK-47 or a, Barrett 50 cal or anything like that. No one's driving a tank, but it is reasonable and realistic for someone to bring a gun to a knife fight.
I just rolled this D20 3 times, and I got a 3, 2, 1, and now I'm scared to roll it again.
Well, that was the countdown, so now I think you have to give us your best feat, right?
I'm gonna blooper that out, but no, I think it's time for best. And I did try to
I
say
think you should leave in the
best
countdown.
and my worst. Okay.
That's just the countdown to Rob's best feat.
Yay! I'm slightly scared now. No, I tried to save the best and worst for last for these. And not that they're actually the best and worst, just the ones that I like the most and that I dislike the most. So, this is genuinely my favorite feat in D&D 5e, as it currently exists at the time of recording.
Do tell.
It was going to go to Prodigy, but there is a feat that came out in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, your favorite book.
All hail Tasha's.
That is, in my opinion, empirically better. It lacks Prodigy's racial restrictions and gives you a little something extra to play with, and that is Skill Expert.
Ah, yes. So, when in preparation for this episode, I made not just my top 5 and my worst 5. I also made the top 5 that I have most often taken, and the next 5 that I'm going to take, and the 5 that I think that every character, regardless of class, could benefit from. And Skill Expert made 2 out of 3 of those lists. It's quite good. And if you don't have a very particular build in mind that you are just working to enable and using your feats to do so, you just want to get better at stuff, Skill Expert is your jam.
Or, I would argue, this is specifically for you who has a particular build in mind and needs to be good at something that you're not good at yet. So, a little context. When I play, which is not often, but when I play, I like to be good at stuff. And that stuff is very rarely hitting things and making them die. I like to be the stealth guy. I like to be the sleight of hand artist. I like to be the athlete, or the acrobat, or the medicine man, or the nerd, or what have you. I like being skilled. I like having proficiency in skills, but I don't like being only as good as someone else who has proficiency in that skill. I don't like being only as good as someone else who has the same ability score modifier as me. No, I want to be better. I'd like to be the best. And that is why I play Bards and Rogues, because Bards and Rogues get a class feature called Expertise. Expertise allows you to add double your proficiency bonus to one or more proficiencies that you have in either skills or tools of some kind. It makes you pretty much world class at something. And Skill Expert will either add to the list of these expert skills for a bard or rogue, or give the opportunity for all of the other classes who lack this feature to get a taste of that, to get a taste of my favorite thing.
Which is pretty much the reason that I would take it, because let's take our current campaign, for example. I built Salem, a sorcerer who has some great charisma, to have proficiency in the persuasion skill. only to find out that our party rogue is way better at persuasion than me because he took expertise in it. And that's just a case of the feel bads to have your best skill completely outshined by a character whose stat is lower than yours.
And, you might have thought, man, I'll be my party's persuasion guy. But nobody wants you to talk to anybody because they know that Otto's just going to be better at it.
I think that no one wanted Salem to talk to any of the NPCs for other reasons, even before that. But yes, it is doubly true.
That is correct, but I was trying to give you an out.
It's okay. But no, I don't feel bad, really, that, Otto, the rogue in our party, is better at things than Salem. But that was a moment, the moment that I realized, rogues, man, rogues.
Yeah, rogues. Anyway, we need to actually say what this feat does.
Right, because we actually haven't talked about a very key part of this, which is the reason why it's on my great for anyone in any situation list.
And we come to it immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to honing your proficiency with particular skills, you gain a +1 increase to any ability score of your choice.
I'm sorry, did you just say any ability score?
That's right, any ability score of your choice. Next to nothing in the game gives you the full spectrum of ability scores to increase other than an ability score improvement, which is what you're giving up to take a feat. This gives you that versatility just straight out the gate, and that is so lovely.
Right. One of the worst things when I'm making a character is the recognition that after I'm done with my point buy, or after I'm done with rolling my stats, that I am 1 point away from an ability score increase in my main or secondary stat. Like, if I just had 1 more point in Constitution, I would have an extra 4 hit points. Or if I just had 1 more point in Strength, then I would qualify to wear heavy armor.
Or to multi-class into something. And that is a frustration, especially if it's in something kind of esoteric that you're not really sure you're ever going to be touching again. Or that you want to take another feat, but it limits your options to an ability score that you're not interested in right now. Skill Expert gives you options. All of them. Speaking of options, Skill Expert also gives you proficiency in a skill. Very few things in the game add to your skill proficiencies.
Right.
More so as more books have been published, but the list is still small.
By and large, it's pretty much over after character creation.
Pretty much. And even so, it's a pretty limited list for most classes. Your average barbarian is only ever going to have 4 skill proficiencies. But even those things that give you a skill proficiency usually tell you what that skill is. But in the spirit of options, Skill Expert says you gain proficiency in any one skill of your choice from the full list.
I'm sorry, did you say any skill of your choice?
That's right. Any skill of your choice.
So good. And then on top of that, after you've made that selection, you then get that previously class-locked expertise in a skill of your choice, which you could even choose on the ability that you just gained proficiency in.
Yeah, you could become an overnight success in some random skill. It could happen. It'd be incredible. Now, of course, you can't stack expertise on expertise, and that's stated in the feat, that it has to be something with which you are only enjoying traditional proficiency. But still, that's big.
You mean I could be a barbarian and take proficiency in Arcana and then be better at Arcana than our wizard?
As long as you were smart. Yeah. Especially if they didn't have proficiency in it. But you can compete in realms that you could not before, and more so, probably win. Again, I like feats that let you be the guy. This one feat lets you be any guy you want. Any guy.
Right, and I appreciate any feat that just gives you that much freedom. And it makes you just so good at that thing. Once again, any feat that will make the barbarian the smartest person in the room with regards to any subject has some roleplay potential in there. Be good at the things you want to be good at. Fix the inconsistencies in your character concept. Class skill proficiencies are pretty locked in, so just throw that out the window and be good at what you want to be good at.
So yeah, I love that. That is my 100% favorite feat in the game.
Well, now let's talk about your absolute least favorite feat in the game. The poo-poo of all the poo-poos in Rob's book. The 2 thumbs down. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to stop here for just a second to say that making this list was genuinely hard. And I probably missed somebody's favorite feat, and I definitely missed somebody's least favorite feat in making this list. There are a lot of great feats out there. Resilient could have been on this list.
Mm-hmm.
Heavy Armor Master could have been on this list. Crossbow Expert almost made it. Inspiring Leader, which I used to think was one of the worst feats in the game. One of the players in the Godfather's game has shown me just how powerful that feat can be.
Oh yeah. Inspiring Leader was kind of a sleeper hit for me. I almost took it on the character I most recently made for your one-shot, but then realized how good the healer feat was, so I had to take that instead.
So there are a lot of good feats out there, and just because Steve or I didn't pick your favorite doesn't mean that it's a bad one. It just didn't hit us like it hits you. And then there's a lot of real stinkers out there too.
While we're qualifying our decisions, I forgot to mention that I also disqualified race-locked feats from both the good and bad list. I know that there's some people out there who are all about their bountiful luck and some people out there who are all about their elven accuracy. I didn't even consider it for good or bad. I wanted this list to kind of be non-race locked.
I tried to do the same, and that's one of the reasons Prodigy didn't make the cut, but then I found Skill Expert. So
a Skill Expert was better even without that.
Very much
It's
so.
just good. Look, if it made your weird little roleplay list and it made my mechanical advantage list, it's got to be good.
Yeah. So my least favorite feat is just boring. It gives you no new powers. It gives you no new buttons to press, no new ways to use your actions. Nothing. It just makes some bigger numbers. It is also not incredibly interesting to roleplay. It is possible to be this guy without taking this feat. In fact, I think that being this guy is far more dependent on what class you chose and what race you chose, rather than what feat you have. Or frankly, just based on having a higher ability score than someone else. In fact, the summation of this feat's benefits can be duplicated by increasing some ability scores.
You really like drawing out these suspense.
I do, because this is going to be a very controversial one, because the only person that I have told that this feat was on my bottom 5 list argued with me about it for about an hour and a half.
Oh boy. This is already a long episode. How long you got? Let's hope I agree with you on this.
My least favorite feat in the game is tough.
I'm going to have to come back. I got some chairs to throw.
No, come back.
You put tough? You put tough as your least favorite?
It is my least favorite.
Man, this is
in the whole stinking game.
This is on my list. Not like my favorite feats that I've ever taken, but this is on my list for one of the feats that I have taken the most. Like, for pretty much any one-shot, I'm like, you know what? It kind of sucked to die in the middle of the one-shot, and I don't have to, like, really lean into any sort of particular flavor or anything like that. I got some points. Let's get tough.
Okay, for the uninitiated, the entire tough feat is 2 sentences. Your hit point maximum increases by an amount equal to twice your level the moment you gain this feat, and then every time you gain a level, you get 2 more hit points added to your hit point maximum. That's it. That's the whole feat.
Yep, that's all it is. Really, it's really simple. It's really straightforward. It has a goal that it sets out to do. It does it, calls it a day.
Does it really do it, though?
It makes you tougher to kill. I mean, empirically, yeah, I would love it if that said 3 hit points per level instead of 2. But it does it. And hey, by the way, I'm certainly not saying that this is a fantastic feat and that everyone should consider taking it. I'm just saying I've taken it a lot and I've been pleased with the results. I'm surprised. If you had told me that this was a bad feat, I would have heard you out. If you would have told me that this was in your bottom 5, I would say, I think you're wrong. But to tell me that this is like the worst one on the list, like, between your worst one on your list and my worst one, it's just like there's no contest. Okay, I'm assuming that you are looking at this as opposed to taking a 2-point Constitution ASI increase. Or have you considered that?
That is one of the things that I'm looking at.
Okay, go ahead and say your piece, and then I'll make my counterpoint.
So here's the thing. This feat can only ever be as good as 40 hit points. And that's at 20th level when things are hitting you for nearly triple digits worth of damage, where they can slap you down from 99 hit points with the single casting of a spell. At 20th level, 40 hit points is not making a lot of difference. And at 5th level, 10 hit points isn't making a lot of difference. It is just not that big of an impact. And hit points are only good at one thing, and that is keeping your character from dying. A +2 to your Constitution score makes you better at concentration checks. Does make your hit point maximum go up. Makes your Constitution saving throws go up. And lets you heal slightly more when you take a short rest and you have to spend those hit dice. All that Tough does is make it harder for you to die. It doesn't make you take less damage, which is what I would want to do as the Tough guy. It doesn't make you resist poison better, which is what I would want from the Tough guy. It doesn't make you anything but a punching bag. It staves off death, and it doesn't even do that well. It is a coward feat for cowards who are scared of death, and that is a bad reason to take a feat.
I am pretty sure you just clipped that whole last sentence.
Probably so. It's so bad. You're not really that tough. You just have more hit points.
Mm-hmm.
Hit points are so meaningless to me, and maybe that's because I spend so much time behind the screen, and I know how quickly those things can go away from the player side of things and from the dungeon master side of things. Hit points go up and down, and healing magic can happen, or damage can happen, and it just yo-yos through the whole fight. A few more hit points is not going to make or break an encounter. I'm not scared of them. I'm not precious with them. It is so inconsequential to me.
Okay, I can kind of see where you're coming from on this. I will tell you that when I made these characters, who I think I've only taken Tough for one-shots, but when I made these characters, I took a look at what I could do to make my character the party tank and to really increase their durability. And I evaluated the different feats that I could take to make that more viable, just to kind of be a meat shield and kind of a damage soak, a sponge for the rest of the party. And I just did the math on it, and I mean, Tough doesn't seem like much. It's not flashy. It just gives you 2 hit points per level, but I mean, it'll get you there. It does what it sets out to do better than the other feats. And if you compare it to taking a 2-point ASI in Constitution, that'll give you 1 extra hit point per level. It doubles that. All at the cost of, not getting a +1 to your Constitution saving throw, which is a fairly infrequently used saving throw. I think one of the most infrequently used saving throws. So getting double the hit points as opposed to a Constitution ASI was kind of a no-brainer for me.
Not if you're a spellcaster. It's not that infrequently used.
I mean, that is true. Granted, again, I was taking Tough so I could be a tank. I don't think there's any saving a wizard's hit point pool. Tough doesn't do it. And to your point, as a wizard, I would probably rather have the Constitution because it'll help out my concentration. But, I mean, Tough did the job. But Tough doesn't just increase your hit points while you're standing. It also increases your instant death threshold, which, it doesn't come up in many games, so there may not be people that know this, but let's say that your character has 50 hit points. If you were to get to negative 50 hit points, even if you hadn't failed all your death saves, if you get to negative 50 hit points somehow, you are dead outright and instantaneously. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. So Tough increases that threshold as well. It kind of gives you a little bit more of a cushion to be revived. So
marginally, though.
Yeah, it's marginal. And there are definitely cooler, flashier things that enable different play styles or that gave me different perks. But, I mean, I just wanted to kind of stay alive and finish the one-shot. So I took tough.
And I get that. And I told you I discussed this for an hour and a half with someone.
You've probably heard all these arguments and more, I'm sure.
They pointed out that a barbarian taking the tough feat can get a lot more mileage from their hit point pool thanks to rage.
Oh, yes, they can.
And that 40 hit points on a barbarian is like 80 hit points to everyone else because they're having the incoming damage. But I mentioned Inspiring Leader. Let's compare those two feats real quick. Again, tough at best, and probably not going to get there, but at best, all the way at 20th level, you're going to get 40 extra hit points.
Okay.
As any character.
Right.
Let's say that you roll pretty well on some stats, or have taken a couple of levels to be able to max out your charisma score, and you take that Inspiring Leader feat that we mentioned. Inspiring Leader lets you spend a little while hyping up your friends, up to 6 creatures, and then you impart to them a number of temporary hit points equal to your level, plus your charisma modifier. If an Inspiring Leader at the same level takes that time to go ahead and make that speech, they're able to impart 25 temporary hit points to up to 6 creatures.
Right, so that would be 150 hit points imparted to the party, assuming there were enough creatures to receive it. Also, notably, that's not a roll or anything like that. That's just 150 extra hit points. Yeah.
And you know what? You can spend 10 minutes each rest making that speech again. No spells required. Your friends don't have to spend their resources. Nobody has to drink a potion. You just stack another 25 temps on top of that maximum hit point pool, and you're ready to charge back into the fray. Yes, it has a prerequisite of having Charisma 13 or higher, but you're going to be wanting that anyway to get the most out of this feat.
Well, let's look at a couple of pros and cons of Inspiring Leader as well. So in the con category, obviously these are temporary hit points instead of permanent hit points like you would get with Tough. Tough, you don't have to do anything to get them. They're just there. And they can be healed if you are lucky enough to have a healer in your party. But notably with Inspiring Leader, it says that any creature can't gain temporary hit points from this feat until it has finished a short or long rest. But there is no limit to how many times you can impart Inspiring Leader to another 6 creatures. So if you had a band of brigands, or you were trying to bolster the town guard, or you had hired some mercenaries to travel with you, there is no limit to how many times you can hand this out.
To how many times you can stand there talking.
Right. As long as you have 10 minutes to spare, you can keep dishing out up to 150 temporary hit points. So there's no limit to how many times you can do this. There's no time limit imposed by the feat. They keep those 25 hit points each until they take a long rest. And you can do this as many times as you want until you need a long rest. You could never fight and just continuously supply an army with 25 additional hit points and send villagers in to fight zombies carefree. It's just great.
And importantly, you can roleplay Inspiring Leader. There are implications to that. It makes you the leader guy. That is your niche. Tough is kind of tough to roleplay and kind of dull to roleplay. Because if damage isn't being dealt, the feat's not doing you any good. So I'm not saying all this to sing the praises of Inspiring Leader, even though it is a really solid feat. And talking with you about it, I think it's more solid than I thought it was even to begin with. But by comparison, Tough, to me, is just so damning and so cowardly and so precious with the character. And precious with the character in a world where Revivify exists, and Reincarnate exists, and Raise Dead exists. So what if you die? So what if your hit points go away? Take the feat and get yourself something cool that you can do. Make yourself the something guy. Don't just be tough. In a world where death is temporary, why try? I just don't get it. I don't like this. I think it goes against why I play D&D.
Remind me not to tell you which feats I take, because I feel really judged for having taken the tough feat at some point in my past. When you juxtapose something like Tough with something like Inspiring Leader, it's hard to say, like, Tough is going to be better in every situation. In fact, Tough might not be better than Inspiring Leader in any situation. I acquainted myself with Inspiring Leader recently and realized how good it was. But for me, Tough doesn't seem that bad. I get where you're coming from, that it's really bland, and I'll give you that point. And it's also pretty blasé and uninteresting from a mechanical standpoint. It just kind of does one thing. And so many other feats give you multiple benefits or new actions or resistances, or they improve something more dynamic about your character, and Tough is very static. For me, though, I never even considered putting it in my bottom 5, but I see why this one would bother you, and there are definitely better things that you could take.
I know that mechanically, and again, you are basing your list off mostly mechanics, if not purely mechanics. And I know why Tough is not on your list. And I dare say Tough is probably not on anybody but my bottom 5. But it is on mine. It's something about it just really gets my goat.
Well, hey, it's not a fun podcast if we always agree with each other and everyone else, right?
It's a fun podcast?
Well, let's move on from your pick to the empirically worst feat in the game. We've talked about some pretty bad ones, but this could be the worst.
I've only really got 2 that didn't make my bottom 5 that were like really contenders for it.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't talked about those, but the way that you're going, I don't think they're them. So I am genuinely curious where you've gone with this.
Well, you know what? I am open to hearing you defend this one in a way that makes me think that it doesn't deserve to be here. I'm a little bit iffy on whether or not it is worse than the Adepts or Fighting Initiate or Charger or Grappler. But honestly, Grappler got a little better as I talked about it, in my own opinion. So let's see if you can pull the same magic with Medium Armor Master.
Okay.
Was that one of your runner-ups for your bottom 5?
Nope, it was not, actually.
So let's find out if you like this one or if you just never really sat and considered how bad this one was. The thing about this one is you kind of have to do some research. You kind of have to read between the lines to discover why this is flawed. Let's take a look at it. The prerequisite is that you must already be proficient in medium armor. We've covered that. Lots of classes are. So it sounds like this might be something that would improve upon being a medium armor master, right? Listeners, I apologize that my voice is going this late in the evening because we've been talking about this for quite a while and I'm still recovering from a cold, but I don't know if you will get to hear me be as animated as I want to be about how dumb this is. Anyway, per the feat, you have practiced moving in medium armor to gain the following benefits. There are 2. Number 1, wearing medium armor does not impose disadvantage on your dexterity stealth checks. Number 2, when you wear medium armor, you can add 3 rather than 2 to your AC if you have a dexterity of 16 or higher. Rob, just before I get started, tell me where you're at on this so far.
So, yeah, a lot of classes are proficient with medium armor, so there are classes that would be able to make use of this. One of the disadvantages of wearing armor, besides light armor, is that it often imposes disadvantage on your dexterity stealth checks. That kind of begins with medium armor, and all heavy armor is right out.
Mm-hmm.
It is just impossible to sneak in that stuff. And in a lot of D&D games, there's going to be stealth missions. And the rogue is going to have to go off, and probably the ranger with them, maybe the bard, if that's how they spent their expertise, and that's the sort of person that they are. And then the tough guy, the barbarian, or the fighter, or the different sort of ranger, is going to be left behind and waiting on the action, waiting to get the call to come down the hallway with everybody, and doesn't really get to play the game until things kick off. Or if nothing kicks off, then they didn't get to participate in that scene. Or they risk accompanying them and tanking the mission. So it is just removing disadvantage from one check, but it can be a pretty important check in a lot of campaigns. So on the first point, I don't hate it. I wouldn't take it, but I can imagine someone else taking it.
Okay. I grant you that at face value, it doesn't seem amazing, but it also doesn't seem terrible, right? It gets rid of disadvantage in a situation that is pretty likely to come up, and then as the second part, it allows you to take advantage of a higher dexterity bonus. What makes this so bad for me is when we look at the 5 types of medium armor that are available in 5th edition. Of those 5 types, I don't want you to look this up, because I know we try to be correct about everything on the show, but I just want to hear what you think offhand. How many of the 5 medium armors actually impose disadvantage on your stealth checks?
I was going to say, I think there are 5, and I think 2 impose disadvantage.
You're doing pretty good. You are correct. Only 40%, that is 2 of the 5 possible medium armors, do impose disadvantage on your stealth checks, those being scale mail and half plate. Which means that even as a medium armor user, part of the ability will only come up if you wear those 2 armors. Now, scale mail grants you a 14 base AC and allows you to apply 2 of whatever your dex bonus is, and does pose disadvantage on your stealth checks. Scale mail costs 50 gold. If you can afford it, a breastplate gives you those same statistics and removes the disadvantage on stealth checks. Meaning that you don't need this whole line of the feat if you have an extra 350 gold, or can get an extra 350 gold sometime between now and your next ability score increase. Let's also consider half plate, because half plate does improve upon the AC bonus offered to you by the breastplate. It goes from 14 to 15, offering you the highest base AC of any medium armor, and does reinsert disadvantage on stealth checks. It also costs 750 gold, making it the most expensive medium armor. And the dex bonus is still capped at 2. This seems like it would benefit a lot from Medium Armor Master, right? Because it will remove that disadvantage that half plate imposes upon you, and it increases your dexterity modifier from a maximum of 2 to a maximum of 3, making me wonder why they didn't just call this half plate master.
I mean, and it is important to note that it's not giving you a +1 to your AC. It's if you have at least a 16 in your dexterity, you are allowed to add a +3 instead of a +2 to the armor class offered by the armor.
Now you're catching on. So let's consider that most of the classes that are going to have a particularly high dexterity bonus aren't going to be proficient in medium armor, and therefore are not valid choices for this feat. I'm thinking about bards, who would use it as a pretty strong secondary ability score, rogues, who would take it as their primary ability score, monks, who don't wear armor at all. It's not likely that these classes who would want to take the medium armor master are even going to be able to take advantage of that. So let's reread this feat again with that in mind. Point 1, wearing medium armor doesn't impose disadvantage on your dexterity stealth checks. That might as well read, save 350 gold, because that is the difference between scale mail and breastplate. Or it could read, you no longer have disadvantage when wearing half plate. Moving on to the second point, if you have a dexterity of 16 or higher and have been wearing medium armor up until this point, which arguably you didn't need to because you could get the same AC bonus from chain shirt or studded leather, maybe plus or minus 1, you can now add 1 to your AC. We could do that other ways that don't require a feat. Like, I'm not sure who this is for. Is it for the impoverished campaign where you will never see 350 gold and never be able to buy yourself that breastplate? Is that +1 to AC that important to you? There are lots of other feats that would give you, shield proficiency. You can multi-class to get shield proficiency and just do that. I'm not sure who Medium Armor Master is for, and I'm kind of leaning towards no one. The classes that want it don't need it. I can't help but think that this one is just poorly designed.
It's definitely got room for improvement. In my mind, I was genuinely considering taking this feat as one of my characters. The character was a barbarian, and I felt that the character had enough hit points and rage coming anyway, so I did not feel the need to pump his constitution. But advantage on dexterity saving throws with danger sense in a saving throw that he wasn't proficient in, I bumped his dex up to a 16. and I decided that he would run around wearing armor because unarmored defense for this barbarian didn't make a lot of sense with the lower constitution that I gave him. I think it was like a 12 or something. Mm-hmm. So the combination of some dexterity plus armor made a lot more sense for that character. But I built him as this outdoorsman and this survivalist and this mountain man. And I wanted him to be good at running around and hunting and facing the dangers of the D&D wilds in armor while still trying to travel unseen. And I was considering taking this feat. The campaign didn't exactly end up in a place where I got that opportunity, but that's the kind of character that I see needing this feat. And is that niche? Yes. Did I actually take it? No. Are there other ways to build that character that would have been better? Probably yes. But there was at least one situation where I thought it would be useful, and useful more than once, which makes it better than the Charger feat, so it stayed off my list.
So let's just do some math on this. If you are somehow playing a character who has medium armor proficiency and has a 16 or higher in dexterity, and you wear half plate and you take this feat, you can achieve an armor class of 18. Now, that is impressive, and we're just going to go ahead and throw aside the fact that this character probably does not exist. That you are going out of your way to make this feat happen. Maybe you rolled for your stats and you just killed everything. You just got 18s across the board. Who knows? If you wore your breastplate, you would have a 14 base AC plus the max of 2. You would have a 16 AC, and you would still not have disadvantage on stealth checks, so you wouldn't need the feat to get there. The feat might as well just say, get a +2 to your AC without wearing a shield. And that would be a really good feat. The prerequisites in order to make that +2 happen are just so specific and so, in my opinion, unlikely to occur that I think that this should have been written in a different way.
And I'll grant you, probably other than barbarians or maybe a ranger, I think if you're really hankering after a big armor class, which is half the reason to take this feat, you should probably just invest in the heavy armor or loot it off of somebody you killed.
Yeah. You know, I will grant you that rangers are always an afterthought for me, and that perhaps this was designed for rangers, because they are pretty likely to have dexterity as their primary or secondary stat.
In which case, maybe they should just be wearing studded leather. But yeah, that's just me.
Studded leather could get them close.
Studded leather and a maxed out dexterity will put you at a 17 AC with no fear of hurting your stealth checks. So, yeah, if you're going to have a high dexterity anyway, why not just lean into that, make it your primary stat, use the appropriate weapons, and go whole hog. But melee rangers and barbarians and woodsmen out there, I can see it. But no, you are right. There's very little call for this one.
It is very niche. I will say now that we've had this conversation, I realize this does work for rangers. They should have just called it the ranger feat.
They should have just made it a feature of being a ranger, maybe.
Right.
Like, make that part of a ranger archetype, a subclass.
And then just say, hey, if you're a ranger, get +2 to your AC. Instead of saying, hey, here's a bunch of hoops you have to jump through that aren't going to come online until you're a higher level. I feel like you should be able to get the benefits of these feats from any level, and I guess technically you can't. I'm going back and forth. I still say that it's probably one of the worst 5, but I will grant you, much like I did with Metamagic Adept, there is one class that can make use of this skill, and it's just one under a very specific circumstance.
Well, as far as discussing feats has gone, we have been recording for over 4 hours.
Our longest episode yet!
Which has been quite a feat in and of itself.
I see what you did there.
But I think that this episode is about to defeat my brother's voice. He's really struggling here. I don't know if it's coming across in the recording, but I can tell.
Hopefully we'll cut a lot of that out, but Rob's going to have to do a lot of editing to get rid of all the coughs and the throat clearings, and I'm sure that if you listen to however many episodes this conversation stretches across back to back, you will just hear my voice slowly deteriorate into nothingness. And I wish I could have been as animated towards the end as I intended to be. But even though I'm awake for it, my voice just is not holding up.
I warned at the beginning of this episode that if we started talking feats, we would go. And it is well into the AM now as we continue to have this conversation. So for the sake of my sleep schedule and my brother's voice, I think we're going to call it here. Thank you, as always, for joining us for another episode, another discussion. And I especially really enjoyed this one. Feats are fun. I know Steve is the one with the fetish, but I really enjoy them too. And I would relish the opportunity to have follow-up discussions and talk about more feats, ones that we didn't mention, like Poisoner and Chef. I'm really excited about these and the roleplay opportunity and mechanical benefits that they provide.
And the last two source books have come out with some really neat stuff that I'm only just now really starting to dig into. Like, my top 5 are mainstays that I've been using for a long time, plus Gunner. But I was hard-pressed not to find room for things like Gift of the Metallic Dragon from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. Definitely going to be on my next character. It's just so good. If you don't know what that is, I mean, you can buy Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, or you can come on the Discord and I'll tell you about what it is and why it's so good.
Yeah, please participate in that discussion with us. I will have that all day and night, clearly.
Strixhaven's going to be coming out soon, so someone buy that and tell me what's coming there. I know that it has a lot of new player options in that book, and I'm very excited to learn what those are. As usual, guys, Misty Mountain Gaming, D&D Wannabe, come join our Discord, at Twinspiration on Twitter, Bardic Twinspiration on Facebook. The conversation doesn't have to stop just because my voice is gone and we all have work in the morning. Come find us on these various platforms, and we'd love to talk more about this and any other TTRPG-related topic.
And please come and join me on Twitch Mondays and Fridays as often as I am able and the circumstances of life permit, as I play video games and talk D&D, write adventures, and most recently, play Dungeons and Dragons.
Say what?
I know. We are teaming up with some of the ambassadors from Misty Mountain Gaming, cosplayers and influencers and models who also have a passion for Dungeons and Dragons. And we have already recorded some one-shots. Hopefully, by the time this episode goes up, they are already available to watch on YouTube at Misty Mountain Gaming's channel, link in the description. And we're going to start streaming those games live, and you can come be part of the fun. So head over to Twitch at Misty Mountain Streaming, link also in the description, and come hang out with us and see how we actually do the D&D thing. Steve is unfortunate enough to be a player in some of those.
That's right. See mine and Rob's radio faces, pictured alongside people who are professionally attractive as we all play Dungeons and Dragons together.
Yeah. Why you gotta speak truth like that? So, in all those places and on those platforms, we look forward to enjoying some more Dungeons and Dragons together with you soon. But if not, you can always catch us here in a couple weeks on the next episode of Bardic Twinspiration.
See you then. The outro music you're listening to right now is called Mega Epic, and the intro music is called Super Epic. Both were composed by the wonderfully talented Alexander Nakarada and utilized under a Creative Commons license. You can find more of his music at serpentsoundstudios.com. If you enjoyed our content, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and review on your listening app of choice. To keep up with us on social media, look us up on facebook.com/Bardic Twinspiration and on Twitter at @BTwinspiration. Want to interact with us directly? Come join our Discord. After all, who are we if not people who are willing to roll the dice on making some new friends? Links in the description. Come check it out.
Editing Rob, go back and take out the incorrect bullshit you said where you confused incapacitated and restrained. Please, thank you.
Yeah.
Nothing else gives you this. A half-elf or a variant human. Or sorry.
Resilient does, but they're the only two.
Yeah, but there's other reasons. Resilient really should have made it in my top 5, frankly.
I was just say
it made it onto my top 5 of all feats for anyone.
Oh yeah. The races that are likely to have a really high bonus to their dexterity are things like, say, rogues, who can only use light armor. Okay. And bards are medium armor or light armor?
Well, first of all,
I'll fix that.
Take that again.
I'm going to take it again. Tell me the answer.
Bards are light unless they take particular subclasses.
Okay. So let's consider that most of the races that are going to have a particularly high dexterity bonus.
Classes.
The races that want it don't need it.
Classes. By 20th level, the same level that Tough would be giving... Oh god, hang on.
40 hit points?
Hang on. There's an enormous cockroach just crawling over my computer tower. Like a huge sucker. And it's just crawling down my cables like a son of a bitch. That was startling and gross.
Sorry.
I haven't killed him either. I just lost him. That makes my skin crawl. This room is not sealed up well. That made me want to pee like I was about to pee myself. Just look to my left and my computer is moving. What was I in the middle of talking about? Comparing it to Inspiring Leader.
Mm-hmm. You said it will give you a maximum of... Okay, hang on.
40 hit points.
Yeah, I said 40 hit points.
Ugh.
I think you were too calm about it for bloopers.
Oh, it's going in there. Ugh. I know I used to kill those things for a living, but that was a big sucker, and he's where I am. Mm-hmm. Not somebody else's house.
Not you. You're not going to where he is. He's coming to where you are, and that's different.
And my $3,000 computer with cockroaches crawling on it.
Jeez. 40 hit points.
Yeah. Hey everyone, it's Rob, just sneaking here at the end to remind you that this podcast is made possible by Anchor. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. It's free. There are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your computer or your phone, and they do all the distributing for you. Get heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and other platforms, and you can start making money on your podcast from day one with no minimum listenership. Everything you need to make a podcast is in one place. Go to anchor.fm or download the free Anchor app to get started.